Okay. Whew. Hello. Hope you guys are doing well. Tonight we are finishing up our class for the summer. Um, and then we'll see if anybody else joins us tonight. We're gonna I want to talk a little bit about what we do after the summer. Ryan, if you're gonna continue to join us, and um, unfortunately, I have a really bad cold today, so I am armed here with lots of hot water. The only negative is if I have to excuse myself every 20 minutes to go to the bathroom. Oh, okay. Just wait a
Are
few.
you excited for Shavuot?
Yes. We have a really interesting program on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. Two of our we every year for Shavuot, what we've done is because this is South Bend and it starts at a ridiculously late hour at this time of the summer. We start at Shavuot doesn't start tomorrow until 9 o'clock or something like that. So what we do is we have a program before, and we call it Journey to Sinai to play on words because of course we are Sinai, and of course Shavuot is the revelation at Sinai. And so we um, asked two members of the congregation to share their Jewish journeys, their journey to Sinai Synagogue, but also their Jewish journey. And tomorrow we have two longtime members, both very active in the community. Corky, who is 94, and Ellen Corky Carlin and Alan Feldbaum, who is been a member as long as we've been here and before that. So Alan and his wife grew up in South Bend. So Alan's been very active in the community. He's been president of the Jewish Federation, and so they're both going to give their Jewish journeys. I think it should be fascinating to hear, and it will be Ryan. I know that you're um, a little far, although the holiday does start before the holiday. But I mean, the program starts before the holiday. Um, if you could make it up here in the evening, it should be a very interesting program. But we will have it on our Zoom link for worship services. Um, I don't know if you should be getting our regular.
I'll definitely have to watch. They've got me working right up until
Oh, okay,
7, and so I've
okay,
got to hurry home all the dishes I've cooked. But I would love to watch.
oh,
Mom's
that's
been
great.
wanting to attend the classes,
Okay.
but she's got COVID right now. So
Oh, yeah. That's
yeah.
part of me wondered if I had COVID, but it's such a typical cold that I have. I just assumed it was a cold. Anyway, what I wanted to know is, do you have the worship link the Zoom link for our worship services?
I
'Cause-
don't think so. I only have the ones that are for the Intro to Judaism 101 classes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I have it here in an email I got today. Do you want me to put it in the chat for people to
Oh yeah,
have?
that'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah, I wanted to
I'll
put it
do
in the
that right now.
chat, and yeah, and Ryan, and also you're always welcome to join us for any worship services we have. If you want to join, we always are in the evening. We are always at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock Sunday through Thursday, and 5 o'clock. Um, we have a afternoon service on Friday. That's always on Zoom, and then in the morning, 7:30 on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. The other days were in Sunday, Monday, and Thursday we're in the synagogue. Uh, but so the morning services are at 7:30. Um, on Zoom, and the evening services are 6 o'clock, except Friday, which is at 5. So, if you want to participate and be part of the service, if you can't make it up here. All right. So, yeah. So tomorrow night, that's the program for Shavuot. It should be really, really fun because, again, these are two people who've had, well, Corky, it should be fascinating to hear her history, given that she's 94 and sharp as a tack. And Alan has been involved in Jewish life in so many ways, especially here in South Bend for a long time. Uh, it should be really interesting to hear what he has to say. Okay, so I started. Uh, the program starts at 7, actually. We're going to have food first. I thought originally I was told it was going to be light refreshments, and now it sounds like the people who took it over said, no, we're going to do dinner. So it's going to be like a light dinner, probably blintzes or something like that. Um, and uh, and then at 7:30, approximately 7:30, we'll start with our speakers. Um, okay. So, I started this evening saying this is our last class. We're closing we'll pause for the summer. Um, and I guess before I go into our topic, which I gotta pull up here, which is basically kind of summing up, but also to give you some background in American Jewish history. Um, oh, is to a few words about what we're going to do when we start again in the sometime in August or September. um, and if you have, I know that Ryan and uh, uh, Ryan, your mom's name is. No, you're muted.
Amanda.
Amanda. We're interested. I don't know if anybody else will be able to. Any of the other new folks we've had for some weeks will be joining us, but um, I think I'm going to do it a little differently this time. Um, I'm thinking I've done this for 2 years now, and 2 years of recordings on the material. So I think that what I'd rather do is probably move it to something like once a month meeting, and every month I'll send out a series of the recordings, so you can watch it at your leisure. Um, and on a topic. So, we did a couple of things on theology, and we did a whole session on holidays, and to send that material out. And then after people are given, maybe after a month, given time to watch the videos, then we would meet either in person or, I know Ryan, it would be, if you're still in Kokomo, um, we wouldn't do it that way. We would do it maybe continue it on Zoom. But I want to have more interaction. So instead of me just talking. So I think what we'll do is, we'll meet once a month and just review those videos and discuss, what did you hear in them? What do you have questions from the videos? What was what additional thoughts do you have? So I think I may change it up that way, just to do it a little differently. If you have any thoughts, some of you, Blair and Cyrus, Ellen, I think Brittany, you've been with in this class since the beginning. So if you have any thoughts on the class, that'd be great to send them to me, and what you could suggest for next year, for those who will be maybe joining us for the first time. Um, but in any case, for those of you who've been with us the whole year, I mean, I hope you've learned some things. I don't teach this class with the intention that everybody who takes it is going to become Jewish, but rather to learn something about Judaism. And hope that's been worthwhile in learning, that the both the beauty and the complexity of Judaism, this most unknown, well-known religion during this year. But so let me know if you have any thoughts about, well, this is how I would do the class a little differently, or here are things that we didn't talk about that I'm really interested in knowing. And let me know that. So, all right. So with that, let's start. And I think Brittany and Ellen, I don't know if you were on when I mentioned that I have this cold. So I have a lot of water here to keep me going, but my only problem is if I have to go to the washroom in a little while.
No, you're fine.
Okay, good.
Hope you feel better.
Thank you. All right. So here's some dates because American Judaism is so interesting in that it is so different from every other diasporan community. But there have also been a Jewish presence in the United States longer than most people think. The first Jewish person that we believe arrived here actually the first Jewish person or first Jewish people were probably with Christopher Columbus. There's always been wondering whether Columbus was himself a hidden Jew, because although that rumor is mostly pushed by Spanish historians who want to make Columbus to be a Spaniard, because then because he left in 1492. Right, that's the song, right? Whatever it went. Anyway, he left in 1492. Why would he be leaving? Why that time? Oh, he must have been a hidden Jew, a converso, and needed to get out of town, so he, went in just to be a discoverer of new lands. So, but I mean, what I'm saying, the argument comes much from Spanish historians who want to prove that he's Hispanic, not that he's Jewish. But he did have a number of converso Jews with him on the boat. Specifically his the navigator on the boat. So that was in 1492 when they arrived on the American coasts. But in 1585 there was a Jewish person, Joachim Gans, again one of these people traveling from Europe, Portugal, to sailing the seas, and he landed on Roanoke Island, but he didn't live here very long. He left soon afterwards. The first actual community that came was in 1654, and that was Portugal, when Portugal captured Brazil and and expelled the Jews and the Protestants. It was a Catholic country, and if you saw the show Shogun, you know that the Portuguese were very much, it was their navigations, their travels were often part of religious wars too. So the Jews, so actually this is not, I'm missing a date here. Before 1654, Jews had been living in Brazil. And when Portugal recaptured it, they expelled the Jews who had been living there. So most Jews returned to Holland, but a boatload of 23 Jews sailed to what was then called New Amsterdam. And that was the first Jewish community in the North America, in what becomes the United States. A year later, the Jews do win the right to live in and settle in New Amsterdam and establish a Jewish community. So the first Jewish community that was here were Sephardim, Jews originally from Spain and Portugal, although they had come via Holland, where many of the Sephardim had moved after 1492 and 1497. Um, so in the 1650s, there was already a Jewish community there. In 1678, Jews in Newport, what becomes Newport, Rhode Island, bought a cemetery because that was very often the first thing that, oh, that's so nice. R2D2 joined us this evening. That's great. Um, all right. So, uh, one of the first things that a Jewish community would set up was a cemetery because, of course, there are different rules for Jewish cemeteries and burial. So that was a sign of their seeing themselves sticking it out in this new region. In 1730, the New Amsterdam is now referred to as New York, and here we have the uh, the first synagogue is built, and it was called She'erit Yisrael, which is still there. I don't know if it's in the same original location, but it is the Portuguese synagogue of New York, and oh yeah, so we talked about this. I think we mentioned this when we were talking about Sfardim and in the Islamic world. Um, Very often there were so many Portuguese Jews who, after 1496, 1497, left Portugal, that Jews living in Holland were referred to as Portuguese because there were, as opposed to Jews, they were just called the Portuguese because that's where they had all come from. So that, and to this day, it's called the Portuguese, maybe it's called the Spanish Portuguese synagogue. Um, By 1733, there's another Jewish community, also Sephardi, in Savannah, Georgia. So these are the beginning of the colonies, where America, the United States is just eventually, it's not yet the United States, but it's the British colonies are being developed.
Are you sure?
Um,
Business.
and
And
good
none
thing.
of yours.
Um,
Let me guess. You're in this thing, right?
there you go. Thanks, Brenda. Um, Okay, and then in the 1740s, Jewish community develops in Philadelphia. Um, and there's also a little later a community in Charleston, South Carolina. So these are areas that we don't usually think of where Jews are moving. Savannah and Charleston, although there are today to this day there are communities there. But this is where Jews were starting to first move in these new British colonies. Uh, Already 1755, there was an all-day school for Jewish kids in New York. Um, and in the 1760s, Montreal develops its Jewish community. Um, Important synagogue is built in 1763, the Newport Synagogue, and it's known as the Touro Synagogue. If you go to Newport, the synagogue's still in existence. It's now a landmark. I don't know how many Jews live in Newport. And certainly I don't know how many Sephardic Jews, but it is a famous synagogue, and it has in the synagogue the letter that George Washington wrote to the community um, after America was established, the United States was established, in which he promised the famous line, "To bigotry, no sanction." Um, so that's in Newport. Now, 1776, of course, Declaration of Independence, the United States, and this is what's unique about the United States, is that unlike every other country Jews have lived in, we've always been visitors. We have always been outsiders who were allowed to live in the country, and we've talked about this. Sometimes it was good, and a lot of times it wasn't good. Um, but it was always with um, permission, because the Jews were providing something for the ruling powers that they needed. Maybe they were merchants, maybe they were money lenders, maybe there was something that Jews did that maybe they just needed more people in the country. And there was something that Jews did that benefited that society. And then when the ruler or the population decided it wasn't beneficial, um, Jews would be either exiled or persecuted. The United States was different from its beginning. Jews, already in 1777, a year after the Declaration of Independence, the New York State emancipates the Jews, meaning they are equal citizens in every way. And so that makes the United States different. The Jews have been here at the beginning, obviously very, very few compared to the British American population. Um, but they were we were not here under a mandate to do something. We were here as equal citizens, same as everybody else. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't prejudice. That doesn't mean that in some states there were laws against Jews holding public office. Um, there was, periods of time where Jews were treated as second-class citizens. Um, and we know, I mean, the United States, and for lots of people, lots of groups have been treated as the underclass. But in theory, Jews and everybody else, certainly once emancipation of the slaves in the South, in theory, all these groups were considered citizens of the United States who had rights. They had the right to receive rights. Um, and that's very, very different. That's why up until now, the experience of the Jewish community in America has been just so different from everywhere else. Uh, Whether that continues is on a lot of Jewish people's minds, but we'll get to that in a moment. Um, okay, so let's go along here on our timeline. Um, the Jews become more involved with government as citizens in 1788, 1789, and 1791, eventually, when the Constitution and then the Bill of Rights becomes part of the Constitution. The First Amendment guaranteeing freedom of religion. Under federal law, Jews have full rights as any other citizen. Now, what's not true is not some state laws had restrictions, but the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, especially the amendment which guaranteed freedom of religion, Jews can congregate in their houses of religion like any other church-going group. In 1802, it takes until 1802 for the first Ashkenazic synagogue to be established in the United States. That's Rodef Shalom in Philadelphia, and um, and these Jews are mostly starting to come from Germany. Um, Also, very early on in American Jewish history is Reform Judaism. So that's another difference between American Judaism and development of Judaism in America from everyone else. Orthodoxy, I mean, obviously the very first, the Sephardim, they didn't really think of themselves as Orthodox. They were just traditional Jews. Um, Although they do assimilate very, very quickly. I don't even know if there's any of those original families that still have Jewish family in this country. I think they all assimilated out through intermarriage. But um, I wanted to say, but the point that I wanted to make is, so the earliest, maybe that's not the right way to put it. Early on in Jewish American history, there was a a, a Reform Jewish synagogue. That was in 1824 in Charleston, South Carolina, the Reformed Society of Israelites. Well, this is interesting because in Europe, in Germany, reform is developing over time, and it takes some time to develop into what it eventually becomes. Um, the changes are incremental at first, and then they quite significant in terms of the change that moves from traditional Judaism. But in the United States, in this young Jewish community in the here, um, Reform Judaism is right there at the beginning. In fact, um, the uh, Ashkenazic, the first, I don't even know if he was a rabbi. It was a little murky as to who were rabbis and who were just learned Jews who took the title of rabbi. Isaac Leeser in 1829 became the rabbi of another congregation in Philadelphia, Mikveh Yisrael, and that was considered to be an Orthodox congregation. So you did have this perception of more traditional and less traditional um, Judaism expressed in the United States early on. In the 1830s, that's when a huge immigration, at least compared to anything before it, of German Jews begins coming to the United States. There are a number of reasons for that. Some of them were a persecution in Germany. Again, a reminder that in the early 1800s, Jews were given, were beginning to be given equal rights in European countries, but there was always a backlash to it. So in 1848, there was a huge backlash, and also for economic reasons, lots of German Jews started immigrating to the United States. Reform Judaism began in Germany, so the Jews coming over were of a particular type. They weren't Sephardim, they were Ashkenazim, and German Jews were unique, even in that Ashkenazic European world, some of their practices. So German Jewry puts a stamp on Judaism in this country. Um, uh, Many of these, and I know this from living in Appleton, Wisconsin, a lot of these Jewish immigrants to the United States in the 1800s, late mid 1800s, branched out. They did not live, many of them obviously lived in the cities, but a lot of them branched out to small communities to where other German Americans lived because they spoke the same language. And they became peddlers and merchants in these areas. So Appleton, Wisconsin, had little communities of Jewish families throughout the middle of Wisconsin where they really would only get together once a year on the high holidays. Appleton was like the area for these small communities, and they would come to Appleton, but all the little towns in Wisconsin had communities. I mean, we even have that here in Indiana, that there are various area cities, small towns that have no Jews anymore. But they did in the 1800s, when Jews would be peddlers, merchants, begin their businesses. And again, a lot of it was helped by the fact that they spoke the same language as, because this was a time of huge German immigration to the United States, not only Jewish, but Christians who were coming to the United States. And so Jews spoke that language and they could connect, they could, do business with these new immigrant Americans because they were all German. Okay. The Philadelphia continues to be a important place for Judaism in America. And in 1838, Rebecca Gratz, I don't think the school's named after her, but it's after her family. Gratz College still exists in Philadelphia. I don't know if it's a Jewish college anymore, but it used to be a Jewish Jewish college, kind of like Spertus in Chicago. Um, and she created the first Jewish Sunday school in the United States in Philadelphia, and it's part of an Orthodox synagogue. Again, Jews are trying to fit in, and again, because of their connection to some of them, their connection to reform, there's this sense that, well, Sunday is the day when people are taking off in America. Everybody's off on Sunday, so we'll be off on Sunday too, and that's the day that we're going to educate our kids in our faith. Um, okay, what happens? Oh, also in the 1840s and 1850s, the beginning of how should I put it? There's a influx of rabbis. And this is another area of why American Judaism is so different. There were very few, I mean, I mentioned, I think, some of them, we don't even know if they were actually rabbis, but they certainly were referred to as rabbis. Isaac Leeser, there was another person, I don't have the name here, but who came, was around this time. But most of the Jewish communities do not have rabbis. So that means they are lay-led, in some ways very much influenced by the Protestant communities, congregational churches, where the community, the lay people, run the show. And so, unlike in Europe, where the rabbi was the authority, maybe the local community had a rabbinic authority, certainly the in the larger communities, and the rabbis were the Jewish authorities. Well, in the United States, you don't have rabbis. So the lay people are becoming the leaders of the community and representative of the community. And that influences a lot of, yeah.
I'm in Jew church right now.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Did you clean something?
Where are we here? Let me
It
just,
smells like you opened it.
okay. So, and that impacts on how the Jewish community develops here in the United States, where the it's lay-led. The leadership of the Jewish community, or the representatives to the non-Jewish world, the Jews who are involved in, as representatives for the Jewish community, are lay people. They're not the rabbis, and the rabbis come later. So that also makes a big difference. One of the important rabbis at this time is Isaac Mayer Weiss. He becomes the leader of Reform Judaism in the United States. And he sets up in Cincinnati. And he's a tremendous organizer. I guess technically he also was not a rabbi in the sense of he wasn't ordained. Okay. He also was not technically a rabbi, but was must have been learned enough to lead. And he's a great organizer. And he comes to the United States from Bohemia, and he organizes a rabbinic group. He organizes a lay group, which today is called the Union of Reformed Congregations. It used to be UAHC, Union of American Hebrew Congregations. And he referred to himself as a Hebrew. And so, he called this, instead of Jewish, it would be Hebrew. They were Hebrews. Hebrew congregations. So he organized the lay people, he organized the rabbis, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and he sets up in Cincinnati because in 1846, or in the 1850s, that was like the western end of the United States. And that was the growing communities. So he thought he was ahead of the time. And then 150 years later, they shut down, or no, more, 100 and 60, 70 years later, they shut down his college in Cincinnati. And the Reform movement now only has, it's only in Los Angeles and New York where Jews live. But for a long time, and I grew up in the Reform movement, Cincinnati was the center of the Reform movement, which has a decent Jewish community, but it's not New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. And he probably set it up in Cincinnati also because, again, if Philadelphia and New York had more traditional Jewish practicers or observers, he was out there on the front, on the Western Front, and it was more liberal. And that's, of course, the Reform movement. The Reform movement of Isaac Mayer Weiss in America was quite radical in terms of they were following the radical path of the Reform movement. So there were calls to make Sunday the Sabbath day because that was the again, everybody else in the community was observing Sabbath day on Sunday, so we should too. It's just easier to be part of the overall community. Okay, let's go to 1853. Isaac Leeser, again that Orthodox leader in Philadelphia, he publishes an English translation of the Bible. 1854. Here's no, that's not what he started. Okay. Okay, let's move along here. 1860s, the Civil War finds Jews on both sides. Obviously, that we saw that there were Jews who were living in the South, there were Jews living in the North, and Jews are on both sides of the war. Although many of the Jews were abolitionists, but some, like for example, Judah P. Benjamin was appointed the Secretary of State of the Confederacy. He was a senator from Louisiana, but was from being from Louisiana, he was in the Confederacy. Already, because there are enough Jews serving in the northern forces, they're actually Jewish army chaplains. Very what's the word I'm looking for? Notorious. That's the word I'm looking for. Notorious event during the Civil War is when General U.S. Grant expelled Jews from some of the areas of the which were occupied by the Army of Tennessee. He was motivated not by their religion, but that they were engaging in commercial traffic with the South. So you had these Jewish businessmen, merchants in Tennessee. Obviously, that was part of the South, although I think Tennessee at that point may have been have joined the North in the fight. But they had been continuing to do commerce with their business associates, probably other Jews in the South, and so he expelled them. And this was considered to be a very a horrible act, because again, it was like connecting us back to Europe, where Jews are kicked out of, exiled from certain areas, and the expulsion decree was revoked by Abraham Lincoln. So it didn't last for very long, but what it did do was it hurt Ulysses S. Grant, politically, as he was, eventually later became president. He ran for president, and the irony is that Grant actually had good relations with Jews, and some of his biggest supporters and financial backers, because he did fall on some hard times after the war, were Jews. So he personally had no issue with Jews, but he had been given information about what they were doing, and during wartime, he wanted them to stop their business practices and so he expelled them. So it was a black mark on his legacy. But the irony is that he was really very close with Jewish individuals after the war and in his political life. Um, let's just move along here. Okay, so 1873 is when the Reform Lay Organization begins, Union of American Hebrew Congregations, and 2 years later they open a rabbinical school in Cincinnati, Hebrew Union College. Again, Hebrew as opposed to Jewish. Um, the um,
Is there a reason for that, Rabbi? Like, why did they prefer to be referred to as Hebrew rather than
I,
Jewish?
That's a good question, and I don't remember. I know there's a reason for it, but I don't. I think it was mostly because they wanted to connect. I put it this way: they wanted it to sound to connect more with like an ancient past. So these were Hebrews. Jews were something that had, that I mean, and I'm sure they were called Jews too, but Hebrew was a little more fancy. It was a little more, what's the word? Not fancy. It was more maybe high class. I can't think of the term that I want, but it was like like, oh, we are Hebrews, and as opposed to Jews, because Jews were people who were despised by some, and Jews were what they were called in Europe, and so I think he was just looking for more distinguished, a more distinguished title for the faith. And so they referred to themselves as the Hebrew congregations and Hebrew Union College.
Were
Um,
they was it kind of like an elitist type thing? Is that what they were trying to do?
I don't know if I would say elitist, but more because I think he may have been, it could be, and I could be wrong about this, but that they wanted to be acknowledged as something new, something obviously new but old. I mean, they were Jews, but they wanted to be um, th- to have this kind of more distinguished title than the common term Jew. And so the notion of Hebrew smacks of this ancient religion. It's not that we didn't just show up on the in this country, but rather we are a distinguished group. The people of the Hebrew nation, and early before rabbinic Judaism, before Jews, before really the Romans, you refer to Jews as Israelites. So I think Hebrew was just considered by them to be a a more, as I said, a distinctive term to refer to themselves as. But I don't know if they referred to themselves as Hebrews. I think it was just that they wanted the title in the institutions that they created. Um, I'm not aware that Reform Jews at this time referred to themselves, "Oh, I'm not Jewish, I'm a Hebrew." Um, they probably referred to themselves as Jews, but the idea of creating a college or an organization, it sounded more um, prominent to be referred to as a Hebrew Union College. Um, but that's the best I can do for you on the top of my head. Um, oh, so and now Jews are starting to grow in the country. By 1880, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, the Reform movement's arm, lay arm, published a census of American Jewry, and they said there were 250,000 Jews in America. I don't know at this time how many Americans there are, but you can see it's grown quite a bit from that family, that those 23 Jews who showed up in from Brazil. Now, change is coming though. 1881, and we touched on this a little bit in talking about Ashkenazic Judaism. At this point, most Jews live in Poland and Russia, and in the 1880s, once again, the liberalizing tendencies of the previous Tsar, Alexander II, fail. Yeah, he's assassinated, and his son, who takes over, goes back to the good old days of Jew hatred, and tremendous number of pogroms hit Russian Jews. And Jews were always poor there. I mean, they were always struggling financially because the emancipation, the Enlightenment, Jewish Enlightenment, known as the Haskalah, which had been developed in Central Europe, had not yet or was just beginning to arrive in Russia. So the average level of education of the Russian Jews and their participation in the broader society was very weak compared to, let's say, Jews in Germany and other Central European countries, France, even England. And so that pushes Jews in Russia and Poland to leave. And they come in huge numbers. So you had 250,000 in 1880. By 20, 30 years later, let's see if I got the number here. I don't know where it is. Well, by the time that the United States shuts its doors in 1924, there are about 5 million Jews. I thought I had the numbers here. Okay. So even though, I mean, you're talking about a 30-year period, but that's a huge jump. 30 years to go from 250,000 to about 5 million, or 4 or 5 million. And that causes tremendous upheaval in the American Jewish community, because up until now, you've had mostly liberal Jews who speak German, swamped by, and who are very comfortable. You know, they mix and match with their Gentile neighbors. Some of the Jews already by the 1880s had become prominent, a number of in the banking business. There was a famous incident in 1877 of Joseph Seligman, who was already part of a well-known banking family. He was refused admission to a hotel in New York, in Saratoga Springs, New York. So there's still prejudice, but what was significant about Joseph Seligman being refused admission is that he was a very wealthy individual who was prominent in New York politics. But all of a sudden, you've got millions of these traditional Jews who do not speak German. They speak Yiddish. They are not Reform. They are traditional Jews. And they're coming into the country, and they're swamping the numbers of the older German Jews. And that causes a real rift in the Jewish community at the time. And so what the Jewish community does is some of these German well-to-do Jews establish the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York in the 1880s, in 1886, and that's the beginning of the conservative movement. There was a break in I should mention this, in 1885. There was the Reform movement had become so liberal in their approach to Judaism. They create this Pittsburgh platform in which they basically disavow ritual mitzvot. So kashrut's not that important. You know, you can be a Jew without kashrut. You can be a Jew and observe Sabbath on Sunday. This breaks that first of all, that breaks a lot of the Reform movement. So some of the Reform Jews were more traditional, and some of them were more radical. And the Pittsburgh Platform and a very famous banquet called the Treifa Banquet um, occurs. And at the that's known as the Treifa Banquet because they served a lot of treif foods. This is, in consonance with the Reform movement at that time, saying that you don't really need to, the kashrut laws are not necessary anymore. Well, that split the Reform movement, and some became more traditional. The traditional ones, became part of what was known as the conservative movement. The idea was to conserve many of our practices, Jewish practices, and conservative Judaism when it began was mostly pretty orthodox. It was just a little bit different in terms of its openness to history, to historical development of Judaism. So intellectually, it was different from orthodoxy, and the cemetery. That's what the Orthodox used to call the seminary. The Jewish Theological Seminary is opened in the late 1880s, but it doesn't last too long. It starts to fall apart, and so what happens I think it's 1903. I have the right year. Well, it's in here somewhere. Oh, 1909. No. Well, it doesn't matter what year it was. In the early 1900s, the Jewish Theological Seminary is reestablished, this time by these wealthy German Jews. Oh, here it is, 1909. This Jacob Schiff, the guy who was kicked out of the hotel, reestablishes the Jewish Theological Seminary that had fallen on hard times. And the goal was to educate these Yiddish-speaking traditional Jews coming from Russia and Poland and Eastern Europe to become more American. And one of the great leaders of conservative Judaism in the 20th century, Finkelstein. What was his first? Sort of a little embarrassing. Lewis, thank you. Louis Finkelstein went to this theological seminary. He was a genius and brilliant scholar, and he has a whole generation of rabbis that conservative rabbis come from his line. And I remember that his grandson, who I went to rabbinical school with, said that his father mantra that he learned at the seminary was, to be a rabbi in America, you must know baseball. So that's a little, it's a funny way of putting it, but that was the idea, is that we have to train these Russian Jews who are so different from us, we more sophisticated German Jews. They don't speak the right language. They speak Yiddish. They're loud in shul. They're not polite. We got to train them how to be Americans, and that's what. So the Jewish Theological Seminary, which eventually becomes the conservative movement's rabbinical school, is established by Reform German leaders to encourage these to train American rabbis for this new Jewish population, which I think says something about the commitment that Jews in America had at that time to the community, this civic, the sense of civic responsibility that they had. They weren't going to synagogues that were traditional, but they knew that they needed to assist, create some kind of an institution that would allow American traditional Jewish leaders to lead their flocks. At this time, there are other developments too. It's not just religion. secular Jews are coming from Russia. Some of the Jews in Russia have been affected by the Enlightenment, and they've not, as well as um, Jews who had Jews from Central Europe and Western Europe who had already been affected by that. But some of the Jews who came from Russia were socialists, and they set up secular school systems and Yiddish, in which the language was Yiddish, and it was established by there was a group known as Poale Zion, socialist Zionists in 1910 that set up a secular school system. Um, Another important event, a tragedy in American Jewish history, was the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, which shined a light on the atrocious conditions that many Jews in the New York area who were working in factories were living under. 140 women who worked making shirts at the Shirtwaist Factory died in this terrible fire. And the reason why they died is because the owners locked the doors. Not during the fire. They locked the doors every day so that the woman couldn't leave, and they treated them horribly. And when the fire broke out, they couldn't escape. They were just trapped inside the building. It was a horrible tragedy. And this was not Jewish people suffering at the hands of Gentiles. These were Jewish people suffering at the hands of Jewish owners. So Jews were on both sides of the equation. They were the employers and the exploiters, as well as in the larger number were the victims of these terrible conditions. In fact, the person who created the AFL-CIO, what's his name? Sam. Oh, let's see if I got his name in here. Of course, I don't have it. But the person who was the founder of the AFL-CIO, what eventually becomes the AFL-CIO, was Jewish. To 1912, a couple more significant events. Lewis Marshall, no, that's not the one I want. 1916, Louis Brandeis is appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. First Jew appointed to the Supreme Court. He's not the only one. As I said, the 1924. So you have about 30 years of massive immigration from Europe to the United States. Not just Jews. I mean, Italians were coming over, all types of immigrants from Europe, but they were from a different part of Europe than the German immigration. They were from Southern Europe or Eastern Europe, so they were darker skinned. Jews today are considered the epitome of whiteness. Well, in the 1920s, we were not white. We were dark. We were dark-skinned people. And in 1921 and 1924, the Immigrant Act closed America to Eastern European Jews and to these other groups. It was motivated partially by pseudoscientific racial concepts. And again, so they were closing the doors to these dark people who weren't the same as white people. And and of course, this was horrible because this was right at the time of the development of Nazism in Germany, which we talked about last week. So just at a time when Jews are in the most danger and need a place to go to, America, which had been accepting the majority of these immigrants and Jewish immigrants, shuts the door. Okay, let's move along here. Oh, here, 1927. Here's the number. 1927, so this is the end of the major immigration. A survey showed that there were Jews in 9,700 towns, 9,700 towns and rural districts in America, and that there were 4,228,000 Jews in the country. So you can see over 30 years, I mean, it grew geometrically, the number of Jews in the country. There were 3,000 congregations in the United States. But here's something interesting about congregations. Very few Jews actually belonged to synagogues. I think in the 1920s there was another, in this survey, I think it was around 12,000, 12,000. 12% of the Jews in America belonged to a synagogue. And that's something very significant also about American Judaism. It's the first diasporan community where belonging to the Jewish community, to a Jewish community, and what do I want to say, institution, a Jewish institution, was not obligatory. In most European countries, Jews, that's how you knew how many Jews were. Jews had to register with their community, but not in America. So very few, that doesn't mean that Jews weren't involved. There were, it says here, there were 17,500 Jewish organizations. There were numerous Yiddish newspapers in New York. So Jews were connected as a community, but not to synagogues so much because they didn't have to. They didn't have to belong to a religious organization. There's a famous, there's a myth that where the Jews came into New York at Ellis Island, there's a mound of hundreds of thousands of tefillin, you know, with the phylacteries that we wear in morning prayer, that are sitting at the bottom of the waters there because people came in, they threw off their traditional practices. And so Jews were involved with Jewish organizations, but not necessarily religious organizations. In fact, but there would be times when Jews would go to services. So in the 20s and the 30s, the biggest days of the Jewish year at a synagogue where they would have multiple services were the days of Yizkor, when Jews would come to say the memorial prayers on the festivals or on Yom Kippur. Those were the big days, and so many days that they would have, repeat performances. Well, today that just doesn't hold sway. But for Jews coming in that time, it was the religious liturgy that connected them to their Jewish life was memorial prayers because of what they had left. But the rest of the time, they might have been, involved in some other Jewish social organization. And often that's, if they belonged to a synagogue, that was why they belonged, was to connect with fellow Jews socially. Let's see, what else we got here? Let's move along here. Oh, 1939, another big deal. Felix Frankfurter becomes another U.S. Supreme Court justice. So again, Jews are becoming prominent in American civil life. 1941 to 1945, we talked about the Holocaust in Europe, but 500,000 Jews served in the American armed forces during World War II. And there were Jews who were distinguished, generals and admirals as well. Before the World War II, most Jews were not what you would call Zionists. They were Americans. They were interested in America. There were organizations even that were anti-Zionists because they were afraid, for the most part, of distinguishing themselves, because they were mostly afraid. And the same thing happened in England that they were terrified that if we identified too closely with the state of Israel, with there was no state of Israel, with the land of Israel, that that's what Americans would say. Okay, go. That's your place. Well, we don't need you here. So, out of fear of anti-Semitism, many of them there were anti-Zionist, active anti-Zionist groups. Nevertheless, Zionism was a growing phenomenon in the United States. Support for the Israel for developing a sovereign state in Israel, and then of course after World War II, everything changes. Then all of a sudden, all Jews are Zionists. After the destruction of the Holocaust, and in 1948, of course, the creation of the State of Israel, there was no such thing as, I mean, there may have been some anti-Zionists, but they were few and far between after 1948. 1951 is an important date for one element of American Judaism, and that's because Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson became the head of the Lubavitch Hasidism. He succeeds his father-in-law. We talked a little about the Hasidic movement. The Hasidic movement is a dynasty, and it's the Rebbe is succeeded by his son, or if he doesn't have a son, in this case, son-in-law. Schneerson is an amazing Jewish visionary and leader, very orthodox, and this is post-World War II, when many Hasidic Jews had been destroyed. But he's here living in America, and he only lives in America. Once he came from Europe, he grew up in, I believe he had a degree from University of Berlin. I think he was an engineer. And so he came, but I believe he came before World War II, before the Holocaust. I don't remember I don't think he was a survivor. I think he comes before. And like a number of them, he's snuck out of Europe to save him. A lot that happened with a number of Hasidic leaders. Their followers snuck them out of the country. Anyway, he takes over the Lubavitch movement, and he grows it into what today, now over the next 50 years. He grows it into probably what is the largest and wealthiest Jewish organization in the world today. We do have a Lubavitch. They're also known as Chabad. There's a Chabad rabbi in Granger, and he developed, one of the many things he did to developing were this thing called the shluchim. They were messengers, and he would send his followers out to all the places in the world and bring Judaism to those places, not to convert non-Jews. They had no interest in making non-Jews Jewish, but they wanted to make Jews better Jews. And they are all over the world today. The largest Passover Seder in the world is in Nepal. Thousands of Jewish travelers going through Nepal. A lot of Israelis also taking time off the army. They travel through Nepal, and they've got a Chabad outpost. I don't know what they do the rest of the year, but at Pesach time, everybody who's Jewish in the area is welcome to the Seder, and there's 1,000 people at the Seder. They set up rabbis in houses all across the country and the world, and they fulfill the needs of Jewish people wherever they are. They're very open-minded regarding Jews. So even if a Jewish person isn't observant, they don't care. You're Jewish, that's great. And that's their strength. On the other hand, they are extreme Orthodox, and they can sometimes how should I say? get in the way of other Jews because they're such a wealthy organization. For example, a lot of times Jewish people will connect with Lubavitch, even though they're not Orthodox Jews, but they don't pay dues. There's no dues. It doesn't cost you anything to go to Chabad. And that's really hard for other congregational groups that depend on people's donations. They don't depend on that because they have their fundraising apparatus is so tremendous that they don't depend on that. And so sometimes they take people away from other congregations where the people might make more of an impact. Okay, so that's Lubavitch, and that's the Orthodoxy. Should also say something, I don't have much information here about the 1960s, but we should say two things about the 1960s and its impact on American Jews. One was the counterculture. The counterculture, like it affected everybody in the Jewish world, in the American world, people turned against authority, and that so Judaism, so Jewish Americans started to were part of that trend as well. So there were Jews who, were taking more radical approaches to their Judaism. There were Jewish groups who, and there was also dissatisfaction. That's another thing I should say. There was also dissatisfaction with the brand of Judaism of the 1950s. Jewish synagogues borrowed a lot from their Protestant comrades, meaning that whereas in a European Orthodox style synagogue, you go in there and everybody's talking and there's humming and there's arguing with each other. If somebody makes a mistake in the Torah reading, they're screaming out, you screwed up. No, this is the way you pronounce the word. Yeah. The American synagogue borrowed from Protestantism the idea of politeness. You sat quietly in your seat. You didn't sing too loudly because you had a cantor who had a beautiful voice who was the star of the show, and you sat quietly as the cantor led the prayers and had these elaborate compositions that he was singing. And so in the 60s, there was kind of a rebellion by some younger Jews against that kind of Judaism. And services became, the music became more sing-along, was one difference. There was a sense of connection to the land, even if with the United States. But there was also a different rebellion going on, which was a back to the sources. And some of these people became more Orthodox. So just give you an example of Judaism in South Bend. In the 1970s, or no, let me start earlier. 100 years ago in South Bend, 80 years ago, there were 4 synagogues, 3 Orthodox, various types of Orthodoxy. Sometimes it wasn't even different practice, it was just different social circles. So 3 Orthodox synagogues, 1 Reform synagogue. By the 1970s, there were no Orthodox synagogues left. I shouldn't say that. There was one small dying Orthodox synagogue, and there was a conservative synagogue, there was a Reconstructionist synagogue, and Temple was the Reform synagogue. But the Orthodox family, which is still the prominent family at Hebrew Orthodox Synagogue, the Lerman family, which had become very wealthy, they wanted to preserve Orthodox Judaism. So they imported what's known as a kollel. It's a group of married men and their families, who are rabbis, married rabbis, and the rabbis come and they're paid to learn. The community pays them a salary, and they sit all day and learn, and then they also teach classes to the community. The Lerman family was very committed to maintaining an Orthodox outpost here in South Bend, and they had the funds to do it, and they brought in this kollel. And when Rabbi Gettinger, who was the head of the kollel, came, he was told by the Jewish establishment here at the time, they lied to you. Orthodoxy is dead in South Bend. And this is very typical of, that throughout America, it looked like in the 50s, Orthodoxy was dead. Jews were moving to the suburbs, and the Jews who moved to the suburbs either joined Reform synagogues because there was no problem with driving, or the conservative movement benefited greatly because these people weren't ready to go to English services. They wanted the traditional service, but they also didn't want to live in the city. And so the conservative movement, which was more willing to compromise, would say, "Oh yeah, well we'll rebuild in the suburb, and you can drive to the synagogue." They came up with a response to allow people to drive on Shabbat just to come to synagogue, and these Jewish people coming from more traditional homes, wanting to live in the suburbs, wanting to be good Americans, but not willing to go all the way to Reform. Conservative Judaism in the 50s and 60s was the largest movement in the country. It seemed like a good mix. It was open-minded, still not so open. I mean, women, it was still men only ran the show, but it was more open and inclusive, and yet it was more traditional than Reform. So conservative Judaism grew, and there was this sense that Orthodoxy was dead. But in the 60s, partially due to efforts of people like Menachem Mendel Schneerson, partially due to some of the Holocaust survivor families who came from Hungary, which were very Orthodox, Hasidic Orthodox, and had to replace their life in America. Partially due to dissatisfaction with the dryness of modern American Reform conservative worship, and the whole countercultural movement, for a number of factors. Orthodoxy, in fact, did not die. It started to grow. Orthodoxy put tremendous amounts of money into educational programs, day schools, kollels, yeshivas, and these families. Some of the families were, of course, being Orthodox. They were large families, so the families were growing. The average American family had 1 or 2 kids, while the Orthodox families were still having larger families. And those families were then being put into an Orthodox education pipeline where they would go to Orthodox day schools and Orthodox high schools, and they'd go to college, but they would connect to their Orthodox synagogues. And so, and part of it was also the counterculture, where people dissatisfied with, as I said, the kind of the dry Reform and conservative Judaism, they were looking for something deeper. The other factor in the growth of in American Judaism, and Orthodoxy too, but mostly in American Judaism, was the 67-day war. That war was a turning point. Now it's not so clear that it was a good turning point, but it was a turning point. Because what happened in the 1967 war was, before the war, there was a palpable sense of of world Jewry that the Holocaust was repeating itself. The Arab armies were threatening to attack Israel. Israel was obviously at a much smaller footprint than it does today. They were threatening to destroy Israel, as they always were, and they were amassing armies around the borders. And basically, the rest of the world was saying, there's nothing we can do about it. We can't really help you. At that point, before 1967, America was not any more pro-Israel than they were pro-Arab. They were, there was a world of realpolitik, and Jews may have tried to influence their legislators to be more supportive of Israel, but America's interests were also very much tied up with the oil. So in 1967, on June 6th, the Israeli defense decided to strike out to initiate the war, as opposed to wait for the war to come to them. Turns out that the Arab armies were in far greater disarray than had been believed. And in 6 days, again, 6-day war, Israel captured the entire Sinai, all of the West Bank, which is obviously an area of dispute today, and the Golan Heights. So they took the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank from Jordan, and Egypt lost the Sinai Peninsula, which tripled the size of Israel in 6 days. That victory was lionized throughout the world. I mean, I remember having a Time or Life magazine special on the 6-day war, where it was just like everybody was in awe of this little country, Israel, manned by Holocaust survivors, those persecuted in Arab countries. One of these many countries. I mean, the irony, of course, is that Israel is considered a colonialist country, but Israel was one of the many countries in 1948 and the 40s that broke out of colonialism. And so, but here all of a sudden, this little former colony had won this amazing victory. That instilled an amount of pride in American Jews that had never been seen before. And that sense of pride created this stronger sense of Jewish identity, led many American Jews to move to Israel. They wanted to be part of this new history for the Jewish people. And of course, now looking with hindsight, the reason why I said it's not so clear what a great all the positive, if it's still all that positive, because it created all of these tensions in Israel. For Israel itself, it created this fight between the Messianists, who saw, oh, this is the beginning of the Messianic era, and the pragmatics, who are like, well, let's just give the land back, just like we did, right? They gave the land back to the Egyptians and they got peace. And there were calls to return the West Bank, except for Jerusalem, to the Arabs. And that's where the Palestinians can live. I don't know if there was a discussion of Palestinian state at that time, but that the Palestinians and the Jordanians can have that. And in returning the land, we'll get promises of peace, and protection, that there won't be war. And there was this war and this tug of war. And obviously we know that Israel decided, except for the Sinai Peninsula, they kept all the land. And that's caused this tension. But in any case, at that moment in 1967, it created this sense of pride and confidence in American Jews that had never been there before. Since then, of course, Israel has not been the darling of the world, and has, and the Jews in America have had to defend Israel against those in the United States who said that Israel is not the former colony, but the colonialist who's taken the land of the Arab. And so that has, and we all know, given this, what's going on right now, that's really where a huge tension is. The other thing we can mention that affected American Judaism was, and Israel as well, was the release of Soviet Jews who had been living in the Soviet Union. They weren't able to leave. That was the last area where there were huge amounts of Jews in the diaspora besides America. There are 2 million, and many of them came to the United States. About 1 million of them went to Israel, and that impacted Israel, but it also impacted the United States. And so anyway, that is the one last thing that we should just say is after 100, no, when did we start? 16, what did I say? Let me get my math here. 1654. So how many? That's 24. That's almost 400 years, right? 370 years after the first Jews came to the United States, we have a situation where American Jews have become so prominent in American Jewish life, leaders in all areas, politics, academia, scholarship, arts, and entertainment, business, obviously, that in 2000, Joe Lieberman was on the ticket for the Democrats to be vice president, almost became the first Jewish vice president, one step away from the presidency. And while the last several elections have not seen Jews on the ticket, although there are many prominent Jews in the Senate, the last 3 presidential candidates all have Jewish grandchildren, which I think is remarkable. That is that their families have intermarried with Jews. So President Biden has, Bo Biden's wife was Jewish. His son Hunter's current wife is Jewish, and they have children. We all know Trump's daughter converted to Judaism, and Hillary Clinton's daughter married a Jewish man, and they have children. So it's remarkable. After 350 years, Jews have become part of, again, the highest levels of socialization in the United States. And yet, of course, today we see that doesn't necessarily protect Jews. I saw recently there was the most recent survey of American Jews by the American Jewish Congress said that in their survey, 7% of American Jews today are thinking of leaving America because of anti-Semitism. Now, you have to understand a little bit something about Jews. There was a very famous Jewish comic, with names, Jackie, oh God, what was his last name? Anyway, he had a show on The World According to Me on Broadway, which is very popular, and he used to make fun of all different groups of people, including Jews. And he used to say every Jew he ever met was almost a murderer. Why? Because when Jewish guy gets into an argument, he doesn't hurt anybody, but he says, one more word and I almost killed that guy. So he said, Jews are filled with people who almost killed, almost murderers, filled Jewish people. Meaning that Jewish people say a lot of things, but they don't necessarily act on some of their most catastrophic views. And I think it's interesting that 7% of American Jews say they're thinking of moving away because the anti-Semitism is so great. And I wonder, where are you going to go? I mean, I'd like to know who some of these Jewish people are, because a lot of the Jewish people who are the most worried about anti-Semitism are not ready to go to Israel, and there really aren't too many other countries where it's better. But there is this existential concern based on our history that, you know what, we've been here 350 years, but you know what, Jews in Germany they lived in Germany for 1,000 years, and Jews in Iraq lived in Iraq for over 1,000 years, and there's no Jews left in Iraq, and the Jews who are in Germany today, for the most part, are Israelis who have moved to Germany. So there's this fear that 350 years is nothing. So let me see some of the chats here. So, but what was I going to say? So there is a concern. So we have this funny situation of the Jewish community today in America. On the one hand, Jews are accepted in America like no one else, like nowhere else in our history. We are considered to be full citizens. Nobody questions. I mean, okay, extremists, Christian nationalists do. But I'm talking about your average American doesn't question the Jewish presence in America and Jewish citizens. Even now, consistently, the Pew Research Organization asked the question of, what religion other than your own do you admire? Jews always come out on top. Judaism always comes out on top. On the other hand, we know that the extreme right and the extreme left in this country have, the one thing they have in common is hatred of Jews, and that has increased over the last number of years. Some of it having to do with Trump and QAnon and that, some of it having to do with what's going on in Israel right now. And so there's this bifurcation where Jews are respected and admired, and Jews are citizens like all other people. Americans are citizens. And yet there is this continuing fear of our place in America. I don't know what's going to be. I don't know what the future holds. I think that many Jews who didn't think too much about their unique, their Jewish distinctiveness, think a lot more about it now. I think a lot of Jews, there are obviously a lot of Jews who have joined the protests against Israel over the war in Gaza. I mean, I have two kids who are very opposed to Israel and their behaviors, and yet I have to believe that that is simply their way of understanding their Judaism. That I'm saying that Judaism is different than a connection to the land. Or maybe I have a connection to the land, but I don't want to have anything to do with a native state, which is, I think I've made it clear from my perspective that doesn't really hold up. That if you don't believe that Jews have a right to autonomy and sovereignty in the Jewish homeland, then you're basically agreeing with all the criticisms of Jews by the outside world, which is that Jews are not normal, and Jews are not, there is something perverse about them, because Jews don't have a place. Jews just wander from land to land, and we're stuck with them. And this is a way of saying that, oh yeah, that's correct. I mean, if you don't believe that Jews have a right to sovereignty in the land of Israel, or autonomy in the land of Israel, then you're basically saying, yeah, you're right. We Jews are weird. We're a homeless people, a wandering people, and we stay in one place until they kick us out. I think Israel has changed our attitude, for most Jewish people's attitude about that. But clearly, Jews, like my two kids, my two youngest, are wrestling with their Judaism. So it's a very interesting time to be Jewish in America today, I think, because we're really being asked to think about what is Judaism and what's my connection to my people, to my heritage, and to even the land of Israel. Um, I don't think I can't speak for my two youngest, but I don't think they believe that Jewish people should not be allowed to live in the land of Israel. I think they just don't like the idea of a state because that's dirty. You know, you can't, that makes things dirty. You got to make decisions that are not nice. But that's the point, is that I think all of these groups are wrestling with what it means to be Jewish. And so it's an exciting time and yet also a little bit of an anxious period of time. So, those of you, so again, just to finish up now, we've some of you have been with me from the beginning. I hope that it's been a good year and that you've learned a lot and learned more about all the aspects and facets of Judaism. As I said at the beginning today, the first couple of minutes, never expect people to become Jewish after this class, by taking this class. I just want people to learn more about it. But if you're interested in becoming part of the Jewish people, which many people in our community, our congregation, have become Jewish, then certainly taking this class helps you because you know a little bit more about Judaism. We can talk one-on-one, those of you who've been in the class all year long, about practice, and I have talked to some of you about that, practice and observance and where you're at if you're ready to make that jump. Those of you who are thinking about it, you're welcome to keep thinking about it and to continue taking the class again next year. Some of you came in late. I mentioned that I think I'm going to do it a little differently come end of August, fall, where I tape all of these classes. So what I think I'm going to do is send on each topic, I'll send out the videos, the recordings, and then once a month, you at your leisure watch the videos, do the readings of the text that for the bibliography, and then maybe once a month or so we'll gather, if possible in person. If not possible, we'll do it on Zoom, and we'll have a discussion about what you've watched. If you have any more questions, if something wasn't clear, if you want to pursue something. But I think I'll try doing it a little differently and change it up than the way I've done it the last couple of years. You're always welcome at Sinai. That's the best thing is to do, whether you're interested in becoming Jewish or just interested in Judaism. As some of you know who have come regularly, it's great to be part of the Jewish community because it's not just about what you learn from books, it's about the people who are in the community. So it's important for you to come, especially on Shabbat, when the community is in bigger numbers, or or you can even come weekdays. I know Chris came to one of our weekday services, and anyway, that's it. So I'm always interested in hearing from people after the class. What, was there something that I missed that you would have liked to hear more about? Or what worked really well in the class. Also, just know that a week from I guess 2 weeks from today, I'm going to be out of the synagogue for 5 weeks. We'll be traveling. Part of the time we'll be in Israel. So the end of June to July, I won't be there, but the congregation will have services, and hopefully come August, we'll see all of you in person and at some point or another. Tuesday night, if you want to come, should be a really fun program. It's our next holiday, Shavuot. We're celebrating the receiving Torah at Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments. And as I mentioned earlier, we do every year is 2 speakers from the congregation share their Jewish journeys. We call it Journey to Sinai, play on words, because Sinai Synagogue and also Mount Sinai, where they received the Torah. And they talk about their Jewish experiences. And this year it's really going to be great because Corky Carlin, who some of you may have met, 94 years old, sharp as tack, she's going to share with us her experience at Sinai, lived here most of her life. and Ellen Feldbaum, who's been very active in the Jewish community as a whole in South Bend since they moved here like 35, 40 years ago. He's going to talk about his experiences, his Jewish experiences. So two really good representatives of the congregation. 7 o'clock is food. 7:30 we'll hear from Corky and Ellen, and then we'll close with the evening service for Shavuot because the holiday starts so late. Because it doesn't get dark until still not dark out. Okay. Anyway, thanks for being with me all these weeks, and good to see you, Paige. And
Oh, thank you. I'm on my dinner break.
okay,
That's why I
good
joined
for
a little
you.
late.
All right, good. That's all right. I'll send this class out, and then hope to see you guys soon.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat
Thank you,
Tov.
Rabbi.
Take care.
Have a good day.